All right, let's talk about one of the most popular, most influential, and, well, most fabulously untrue books ever written. We're about to dive into The Travels of Sir John Mandeville, the medieval blockbuster that literally redrew the map of the world, filling it with myths, magic, and monsters. I want you to try and imagine something for a second. It's the 14th century. The world you know, it's pretty small. And beyond the horizon? That's just a huge question mark. It's the realm of total mystery. What's actually out there? What kind of strange lands? What magical wonders? And, what terrifying monsters are waiting for you just beyond the edges of that map?
People were absolutely desperate to know what was hiding in those blank spaces, especially when they looked toward the fabled East. This deep, deep craving for stories, for anything that could fill in the gaps, created the absolute perfect audience for a book that promised to reveal it all.
And the man who stepped right into that void was an English knight, a Sir John Mandeville. He claimed that he set off way back in the 1320s and spent the next 30 years traveling the entire world, seeing everything there was to see, from Jerusalem all the way to the farthest corners of India and China.
Except, here's the twist. Modern scholars are pretty much certain that Sir John Mandeville never even existed. The author was most likely a Frenchman who probably never traveled farther than his local library. He just brilliantly stitched together stories from all these other sources into one single, breathtaking narrative, all under a borrowed English name.
And this right here is the key to why it became a medieval sensation. See, the author didn't sell it as fiction. Nope. He presented it as a factual first-hand guide for pilgrims, for merchants, for armchair travelers, anyone, really. It became the must-have book of its time, telling people exactly what they hoped and kind of feared was true about the rest of the world.
So if the author was a fraud, what in the world did he actually write about? This is where the book just stops being a simple travel guide and explodes into a full-blown fantasy epic. Let's take a look at what our so-called knight claimed to have seen.
Mandeville explains that way out in the east, you'll find entire nations of monstrous peoples, and he cleverly ties it directly to the Bible, claiming they're all descendants of Noah's son Shem, who was cursed. Now, this simple move gave all of his fantastical claims this thin but really effective layer of theological plausibility.
For example, he describes a race of people called the Blamae. These guys had no heads. Instead, their faces, eyes, nose, and mouth, were located right in the middle of their chests. Can you just imagine stumbling upon a village of them during your travels?
And it wasn't just new monsters he came up with. Mandeville just casually drops the Cyclops into his supposedly true account. Yes, those one-eyed giants pulled straight from Greek mythology are presented as just another group of folks you might run into on your way to China. No big deal.
Then you had the Penati. According to Mandeville, their ears were so gigantic that they could actually wrap themselves up in them to sleep at night. They used them like a personal blanket. I mean, convenient, I suppose.
The wonders weren't limited to just strange people either. Not at all. Mandeville's world was just saturated with magic. He writes about castles guarded by fairies, rats the size of dogs, and even the literal fountain of youth, which he casually mentions he drank from a few times himself.
Okay, so this brings us to the really big question. With all these headless men and fairy castles and giant rats, how on earth did almost everyone in Europe, from the peasants all the way up to princes, believe this book was the absolute gospel truth for centuries?
Mandeville was, and you have to give him this, a master storyteller who used a brilliant three-step formula. He didn't just dump a bunch of fantasy on his readers. Oh no, he carefully, meticulously constructed his narrative to make the unbelievable seem completely plausible. He was building a bridge of trust from the known world right into the realm of pure imagination.
So this is the crucial point of his technique. He'd start by describing a real place, somewhere you might have actually heard of, like Egypt or Jerusalem, with startling accuracy. He'd give you the correct distances, describe real landmarks, and talk about local customs. This built trust. And once he had you nodding along, thinking, yeah, okay, this all sounds right, he would seamlessly pivot to describing a nearby island that just happened to be full of headless men. The familiar made the fantastical feel, well, adjacent, totally possible, just one more step down the road. His other secret weapon was his unshakable first-person authority. He never, ever says, I heard a story about a well of youth. No, he says, I was there, I drank from it 3 or 4 times, and you know what? I feel great. This kind of personal testimony made it incredibly difficult for a reader to doubt him.
It wasn't a legend anymore. It was an eyewitness account, shared with all the intimacy of a friend telling you about their vacation.
But Mandeville had one final, and maybe his most brilliant trick up his sleeve. After mixing fact with fantasy and presenting it all as his own personal experience, he delivered the ultimate proof for his medieval audience.
He doesn't just publish his book and hope for the best. No way. In the final chapter, he writes that after all his travels were finally complete, he went to Rome to see the highest authority on earth for a devout Christian Europe. And this is the masterstroke. He claims he presented his book to the Pope himself, who, along with his council, examined the whole thing and officially declared it to be true. Now, for a 14th century reader, what could possibly be more authoritative than that? It's like getting a stamp of approval from God himself. Of course, this trip to Rome never happened either. So, what was the lasting impact of this magnificent, globe-trotting lie? It was, to put it in a single word, enormous. For 2 full centuries, this book wasn't just a story. It was Europe's primary text on Asia. Explorers, including Christopher Columbus himself, carried copies with them, fully expecting to find these wonders. This book literally shaped the age of discovery. It sent real adventurers out in search of a fantasy world and primed them to see monsters and magic in the new lands they found. It wasn't just a map of the world. It was the filter through which they interpreted everything they saw.
Ultimately, Mandeville's book may have been a total failure as a reliable map, but it was a stunning success as a work of literature. It was one of the first great works of secular prose in English, and more importantly, it was a powerful testament to the power of a really good story to completely define reality for its audience.
The real power of the travels of Sir John Mandeville wasn't in its facts, but in its amazing ability to tap into this deep, universal human desire to believe that the world is bigger, more magical, and way more wonderful than it appears. It filled all those blank spaces on the map with marvels.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to ponder. What are the widely believed truths, the accepted maps of our own time, whether they're scientific, cultural, or political, that future generations might look back on and see as being just as fantastical as Mandeville's headless men?